Hello and welcome to this edition of Dr. K's Psychobabble. And as you saw in the title, doing a series of videos on neuroscience and taking a really high level, calling them neuroscience, covering everything that was really in my biopsychology class and beyond, doing a whole series of videos here. And we start off one of the basic properties of the nervous system when we look at the nervous system at a cellular level. We understand that as a communication system within the human body, the nervous system, the neurons themselves, utilize a biochemical electrical process in order to send information from one part of the body to the other. So the basic cellular biology of this. So I thought I would start off our discussion here talking about one of the principles associated with that electrical component of the actual neuron. And what I want to talk about is essentially an aspect of this reality that in essence separates a living cell from inorganic properties that occur that involve the development of electrical currents within substances. So without getting too complicated here into trying to give an introduction to this, let's just talk about the world of inorganic chemistry. And in inorganic chemistry, molecules and ions move around, but they move around with specific principles. So let's take a look at that. So what we have here on the left side is a black area, on the white, and the right side is a white area. And what I'm exemplifying here is anything within the inorganic world that there's an inside component and there's an outside component, and on the surface of the inside we have a semi-permeable membrane. Now, the first process that I want to talk about in the relation to this is what's called the concentration gradient. Now, again, this is in the inorganic world. This is basically physics. If, for instance, we had on the outside a concentration of sodium ions, indicated here by the Na, and inside we had a concentration of potassium ions. This is existing again in the natural world. Concentration gradient is the principle that would dictate that under these circumstances, exposed to a membrane that is semi-permeable to sodium and potassium, that the natural forces of energy would move one of the potassiums out and one of the sodiums in, so that there would be a balance between the number of sodiums inside, this number of potassiums inside, and the number of sodiums outside, and the number of potassium. So this is a concentration. So if you have something that's more concentrated on the outside, and you have something that's less concentrated on the inside, those will tend to move together. We might even relate to this a little bit of organic, but let's say we ingest salt water. What happens is if there's a lot of salt on the outside of the cell, there's an attempt to deconcentrate that by taking fluids outside of the inside the cell and moving them outside, and that's why drinking salt water is not a good thing, because it'll shrivel up all those cells as it's trying to balance the too much sodium on the outside. Putting more fluids on the outside to equalize that is not good for the cell. But I'm talking here about the inorganic world. So in the inorganic world, we would see the effects of what we call concentration gradient equalizing the distribution of sodium and potassium between the inside of something and the outside of something across that across that gradient. Now, there's another process, and that's an electrical gradient. And this has to do with the charges, the electrical charges on particles and ions. So let's just say that we had two negatively charged particles on the outside, and we have two positive charges. We would have an overly positive charge on the inside and an overly negative charge on the outside. The electrical gradient, very similar to the concentration gradient, would dictate that these would equalize. So, in the inorganic world, the inside and outside constantly trying to equalize so that there's equal gradients, equal electrical charges across barriers. That's just a principle of our world. Now, enter in life, essentially the processes that engage the material world in a way that, in this case, goes against the actual normal physical properties of concentration gradient and the electrical gradient. What I'm talking about is what's referred to as the sodium-potassium pump. So here we have now, in the organic world, principally within the neuron. So the inside the cell, the black part over here, is now a neuron. The outside of the cell is the intercellular fluid. And the concentration of sodium and potassium is... Now again, let me just say in there that it wants to have that equal concentration, that the one from the inorganic world, so that the sodium and potassium are not thinking about any of this. The natural tendency would be for them to equalize across that barrier. But there's an active process called the sodium-potassium pump that goes against that grain. So here we have this chemical process that is embedded in to the cellular membrane, and it acts upon sodium and potassium in a particular way. Here's another graphic. So we have the sodium-potassium pump that is essentially moving for every 3 sodiums, which are positively charged, it moves out, it brings in 1 potassium, which is also positively charged. So if 3 are going out and 1 are coming in, eventually it produces what we're going to call the electrical potential of this particular cell, and that it is positively charged on the outside and negatively charged on the inside. Realize this is against the natural order. This is, in effect, life saying, I know you want to be equal, but I'm going to, the sodium-potassium pump is creating a situation in which there's a slightly positive charge on the outside and a negative charge on the inside of the cell. Now, potential, if we look at this from the physics point of view, if I lift up this object, like right now I'm exerting force on this object against gravity. I'm holding it up by putting enough force to keep it from falling. I'm essentially providing upward force against the force of gravity. Now, as I hold this here, this object now contains a potential energy. Should the upward force be suddenly taken away, the energy of gravity would be enabled, so that potential energy is there. Thinking about that concept, here we have an electrical potential, a cell in its resting state. It is not currently being activated in the nervous system, is in a state of potential energy. It's positively charged on the outside, negatively charged on the inside. It's ready to go. Should it need to be activated in the process of moving an electrical signal along the path, it's ready to go. It's primed. It's ready to happen. In the next video, we'll talk about the processes that happen that quickly reverse that particular concentration, and they develop an electrical charge, a negative electrical charge on the outside and a positive charge on the inside when the cell is getting ready to fire and send messages down the line. That will be in the next video. We'll talk. So we have potential energy, and then we're going to look at action potential. So resting potential, that's actually and then you have action potential in the next video. So stay tuned for that. Glad you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe, and I will see you next time.